of everything that those UMIA and those organizations stand for, and bringing justice and awareness to their cases. So tonight is actually the 5th night of a series of events and programs that we've had specifically about the Move 9. We call it the Move 9 week. We actually have something tomorrow, and we hope you can join us at Providing Ministry on 846 South 57th Street, 12 o'clock to 4 p.m. We hope you join us for that as well. So the reason why we're here is because this week actually marks the 35th year since the police confrontation at the Move compound, where non-Move members were wrongfully and also collectively tried and convicted of killing police officer James Brandt with one singular bullet. And they've been in prison, they're still in prison today, wrongfully accused and convicted. And now there's only 8 of them who are all passing away not too long ago. I guess one of the things that I want to share is that with the events of the Move confrontation in '77 and of the bombing of the Move home in '85, which killed 11 men, women, and children, they weren't isolated events. They weren't isolated events of police violence or police terrorism on revolutionaries or communities of color. They were part of the institutionalized system of repression and contempt for revolutionary activities around the country and even say globally. So tonight what we have planned is a teach-in on that history of focusing a little bit on Frank Rizzo, who's a name that hopefully a lot of you and unfortunately, a name that a lot of you know for being the figurehead of that repression and that fascism that was in Philadelphia for such a long time. And that's what we're here to learn about tonight. So with me is, to my left, is attorney and activist Micheal Coard, who's with the Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, and I'll let him tell you a little bit more of who he is and what he's about, and also Barbara Easy Cox, who is a Panther in the 60s, and I'll also let you tell a little bit more about who you are in a moment. What I want to do before we actually hear from our panel is I want to share something. I got here a little bit early, and something stuck out to me, and that was this book right here, which is Gil Scott Heron. So another way you can support Black and Nobel, who's hosting this event, is by actually buying this book, because it's theirs, it's not mine. And he wrote a poem that is so relevant today. I know Michael, a little while back, had a celebration for Gil Scott on his birthday. He passed away about a year ago. And this poem is very relevant, particularly if you think about it juxtaposed to Trayvon Martin and the 20 other brothers who have been murdered in similar instances of police terrorism or racist vigilantism. And this was, Michael, I don't know if you know what year this Jose Campo Torres was.
Yes, 78, 79.
78, 79. So I think this is really fitting for tonight and fitting for what we're talking about. So if you'll indulge me, I'll read it for you. This is the 3rd verse. And if you're not familiar with this, I encourage you to read the whole thing. I had said I wasn't going to write no more poems like this. The dogs are in the street. It's a turnaround world where things all too quickly turn around. It was turned around so that right looked wrong. It was turned around so that up looked down. It was turned around so that those who marched in the streets for Bibles and signs of peace became enemies of the state and risked to national security. So that those who question the operations of those in authority on the principles of justice, liberty, and equality became the vanguard of the communist attack. Became so you couldn't call a spade a motherfucking spade. Brother Torres is dead. The Wilmington 10 are still incarcerated. Ed Davis, Ronald Reagan, James Hunt, and Frank Rizzo are still alive. And the dogs are in the motherfucking street. I had said I wasn't going to write no more poems like this, but I made a mistake. Brother Torres is dead. So, Frank Rizzo is no longer alive, but there's still this statue right in the center of our city with his presence reminding us of who he is. And we probably should not forget who he is because of the lessons that are so valuable. So I'm going to stop talking because You didn't come here to hear me speak. So why don't we start? Michael, why don't you introduce yourself and tell and start it off?
Well, first of all, I'm really honored to be here. Do I need the mic?
Yes.
Oh, actually, I'm sorry, Michael. I'm going to ask Barbara
Please.
to start because some of you may have heard, may not have heard that former Panther Reggie Schell passed away very recently, and I'd like Barbara to start by sharing something about him with us.
I don't know how many of you were around. Reggie Schell was Black Panther captain in Philadelphia, but he passed away Tuesday, the 9th, at 3:30 in the morning. Reggie had been ill with dialysis and heart issues, and his passing, well, it took a lot out of him. It took a lot out of a lot of his friends and acquaintances because of the constant person that he was. Honest, caring, unselfish, very knowledgeable, and many, many other things. And like so many of the Black Panthers that have passed, in my circle of comrades, one left to tell our story. Also that collective memory that we shared is one less. But Reggie will be put to rest Tuesday at Alfonso Cannon Funeral Home, 2315 North Broad Street. The viewing will be from 9 to 11, and at 11 o'clock they will have the service. He is to be cremated, so it's not like a lot of people have to go to the cemetery. And I've gotten a lot of emails and telephone calls from people, I'm coming to pay homage. Reggie often described himself as just another street nigga. I like that. I really like that. Because you don't want to be all egotistic and think that you are all that. But many people will be there, and if you have a chance to walk through, just walk through and sign your name. I think on behalf of the family and many of us old heads, we just like to see that. And basically, that's all I have to say about Reggie.
Michael, you want to take that? Like that?
That's obviously a tough act to follow, but the thing that I really appreciate about what we just heard is that it was sincere, it was spontaneous, it was genuine. It wasn't something that was written and prepared, and I think that's how it should be. I gotta admit, I'm honored to be sitting next to this sister because this is living history. The stuff that I read in the history books about the Black Panther Party is right here, alive and well. And it's important that people like her and people like Reggie, that their message doesn't end, that it continues to go on. So people who know Reggie, people who don't know Reggie, but who appreciate what he did, the important thing is to take the baton and keep fighting the good fight. Barbara and I were talking before this whole thing started about the so-called new Black Panther Party. And interesting topic. And I'm all about coalition building and I'm all about unity. But respect is a requirement before coalition building, before unity. And the Black Panther Party stood for something different. I'm not saying that what the new Black Panther Party is doing is wrong. I'm saying it's different. You know, if you start off as a Christian, then you got to remain a Christian. You start off being a Muslim, you remain a Muslim. You don't change in midstream, generally speaking. But maybe we'll get to that later. In fact, we will, because in my discussion tonight, I'm going to be talking primarily about Frank Rizzo. And the thing that I can start off by saying about Frank Rizzo is the same thing I say about America. People look at the various presidents of the United States, they see people like George Bush I and George Bush II and Ronald Reagan. And they say these must be aberrations. These people are stupid, these people are progressive, these people are thuggish. That's not America. But that is America. George Bush I is America. George Bush too is America. Ronald Reagan is America. And Frank Rizzo is Philadelphia in terms of what Philadelphia represents. And I'm going to go into that later, but I want to kind of start off with a chronology. Not that many people care, but Frank Rizzo was born in 1920, and he became a police officer in the 40s at about age 20, 21, and he quickly rose up the ranks. And the interesting thing in the biographies about Frank Rizzo, they talk about the discrimination he had to go through. The discrimination he had to go through, because they say that the Irish had the police department locked down and they kept the Italians out. Well, assuming that's true, what did they do to the black folks? In fact, I can tell you this, and I'm going to talk more about it later. It wasn't until the 1960s that black police officers could drive police cars. Let me repeat that. It wasn't until the 1960s that black police officers were permitted to drive police cars. And you would wonder, how can a black man be a cop in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, and stand up for this system when he directly is a victim of the same system? But anyway, let me deal with the chronology. So we got Frank Rizzo, born in 1920, became a police officer in the 1940s, rose up the ranks from sergeant to lieutenant to captain, and then became a deputy commissioner of the police department. And then in 1967, he was appointed by the mayor to be the police commissioner. He served in that role for about 4 years until 1971. Then beginning in 1972, he ran for office obviously in 71, won in 72, and served 2 terms from 72 to 1980. That's the general picture. Now we have to ask what happened while Frank Rizzo was a police officer, and what happened while Frank Rizzo was the mayor of the city and county of Philadelphia. And there's a whole bunch of stuff I want to go through, but I don't even know how much time I have. I got like 3 hours worth of material, but I don't think I'm 20 minutes. Okay, I'll squeeze 3 hours into 20 minutes. Absolutely. And not only that, it was stated at the beginning of this that this was going to be a teach-in. And I guess to a certain extent it is, but also going to be a teach-out. In other words, it's going to go back and forth. Because I see people sitting out there that know more about a lot of this stuff than I do. In fact, I gotta admit, I stole some of what I'm going to say from some of the people sitting out there. I plagiarized it, Tony, and I'm not going to give credit to the person who I got it from. But it's some good stuff, so you can say I came up with it. So anyway, so we got Frank Rizzo in the 40s, a cop, rising up the rank, became the police commissioner, appointed in 1967, became mayor in 1972, re-elected, and served in that capacity until 1980. What happened during his tenure? Let's start off with Columbia Avenue, which we now know as Cecil B. Moore Avenue. They called it the Columbia Avenue riot, just like they call it the Move bombing. But I don't think Move bombed anybody, and if you understand the history of what was going on in and around North Philly, you can understand why black people rose up. And many people complain that, just like with the so-called Rodney King riots, that why is that black people attack their own community? Where they're not attacking their own community, they're lashing out where they can. And they happen to, if they lived in Center City, they would have lashed out there. But they were in North Philly, they were in Chicago, they were in Watts, wherever they were. So this is the story with the so-called Columbia Avenue riots. On August 28, 1964, August 28, 1964, near 23rd and Columbia, a black woman by the name of Odessa Bradford is in a car, and the car is stopped by a police car. White cop, black cop, and a police car. Back then they were red cars. So they stopped the woman in the car at 23rd and Columbia, now Cecil B. Moore, and they begin to drag the woman out of the car. I mean, like, not beating her down, but just disrespecting her, grabbing her by the neck and arm, dragging her out the car. And the black people standing around are like, what's going on? And the cops are like, pardon my business, mind your fucking business. And people are like fed up. I mean, because this is August 1964, it's August, so it's hot, it's 1964, so, you know, people are getting fed up, people are rising up, and they're hearing about revolution spreading throughout the city, the state, and the country. So now people see this innocent black woman being dragged out of a police car by 2 cops, and they start gathering around, and the cops tell them to mind their fucking business. They decide they're not going to mind their business. So they start yelling, they start throwing stuff, and they start doing what they should have done 10, 20, 30 years before. And now, the police on their radio say a police officer under attack, police officer down, that code word for bringing the SWAT team, and the cops just came in and pretty much just terrorized North Philadelphia, in and around what's now known as Cecil B. Moore. In fact, the so-called riot took place for, I believe, 3 days, August 28, August 29, and August 30. And after the smoke cleared, once again, it's black people who get the worst of it. No cops were arrested or charged for any of the assaults and the violence they perpetrated among black people. Now remember, this is 1964. I can't blame Frank Rizzo specifically because he didn't become police commissioner until 1967, but he was a captain and he was a deputy commissioner, so he had his hands in that. And his attitude, in fact, think about it, if you got this Irish guy rising up the ranks and the police department is pretty much controlled by the Irish, the only reason the Irish would promote this Italian guy is because he's doing what they want him to do. In fact, doing more against black people than the Irish at the time were doing. So let me fast forward. This is 1964, because again, I got to squeeze 3 hours into 20 minutes. By the way, people accuse me of talking too fast, and I accuse them of listening too slow. So if you can speed up your listening, we'll be on the same page. So anyway, 1964, so-called Columbia Avenue riots, black people starting to stand up. And then 3 years later, we fast forward to 1967. That's when more than 4,000 black students throughout the entire city of Philadelphia came down to the Board of Education to demand not only Afrocentric education, but respect for black people, black teachers, black administrators. So it wasn't just a thing where they said, we want black studies. That was part of it. But it was also treating black teachers right, hiring more black principals. And what happens on November 17, 1967? Frank Rizzo is now the police commissioner. And he sends not only a whole bunch of cops out there, but cops on horseback, again, pardon my language, to beat the shit out of 4,000 innocent, unarmed kids. These are not grown men with guns shooting back at the cops. These are kids, they have no weapons, and these are cops on horses just beating and bashing and battering these kids. I mean, it was that vicious, it was that brutal, and that was done under Frank Rizzo. That's 1967. Fast forward 3 years. And everything I'm about to tell you is pretty much what I read in the history books and what is in different documentaries, but some of the people who are in here tonight might have been there. This is August 31, 1970. That notorious photograph you see with the Black Panther Party members up against the wall on Wallace Street, basically stripped and demeaned and disrespected. But the background information about that is really interesting. All of the biographies about Frank Rizzo claim that the Black Panther Party, a week before then, a week before August 31, 1970, had basically put out a call for the death of Philadelphia police officers. And they say this was all in connection with the Black Panther Party's planned People's Revolutionary Conference at Temple University. So they say, okay, Black Panther Party put out a death call to off the pigs, and they're about to have this big revolutionary seminar at Temple University. And Officer Von Collin was shot in Fairmount Park not long before that. So now the police department is on the warpath. And it wasn't until about maybe 3 or 4 years ago that I found out that it wasn't just the cops attacking the Panthers on Wallace Street, that they also originally attacked them that same night in North Philly, and then in Germantown, and finally on Wallace, where 14 Panthers were arrested and 6 of them were stripped naked. Now the interesting thing is the media in North Philly, and the interesting thing is that Frank Rizzo wasn't there. Many people thought he was there, and he claimed that because he wasn't there, he didn't have anything to do with it. Well, yes, he did have something to do with it. He orchestrated it. I mean, if you think about it, the police commissioner is not going to do everything with his own hands. He's going to put out the call, and that's exactly what Frank Rizzo did in this case. And the interesting thing is that the Daily News, I believe it was, 2 days later, quote Frank Rizzo as saying that the Panthers were not strip searched. In fact, I actually talked to Frank Rizzo Jr., the son, who's the city councilor, And he says the very same thing that the newspapers quoted his father saying 2 days later, that the Panthers weren't stripped, the Panthers were mooning the police. That's the official line. I mean, Frank Rizzo Jr. looked me in the face and told me that with a straight face, that the Panthers were mooning the police. I'm like, okay, and this was like about 3 or 4 years ago. True story. Good point. So anyway, that takes us up to 1970. And one of the other things I found out that is really interesting about Frank Rizzo is that he wasn't just a racist, but he was somebody who violated the civil liberties of everybody. Anybody who was a dissident, black, white, male, female, gay, straight, Jew, Gentile, Christian, Muslim, it didn't matter. There was something in Philadelphia that was started by the commissioner who was in charge before Frank Rizzo. And they had this thing they called the Civil Disobedience Man. The Civil Disobedience Man. The Civil Disobedience Man was the prototypical agent provocateur, undercover agent, basically. So that we get a young black male, young white male, and make them look like revolutionaries, make them look like hippies, and join certain movements and investigate and find out what their strategy is, and not just that, but then to kind of agitate for violence and confrontation. And once they promoted that violence and confrontation, that would give the police the authority to move in. This was 1964, before Frank Rizzo was police commissioner. In 1968 or 1969, Frank Rizzo came up with something he called the Civil Disobedience Squad. And this Civil Disobedience Squad, and some people call it Civil Defense Squad, their job was to monitor activists throughout the city. And the interesting thing, when Frank Rizzo was interviewed by NBC TV in 1970, he bragged to the reporter about having, back then there were really no computers like today, he said they had 18,000 3x5 index cards with the name, address, date of birth, and summary of activists in Philly. I didn't think there were 18,000 people in Philly at the time, but I guess there were. But he had a list, not a list, but a 3x5 card, and I'm sure some of you own that list. You probably still are on that list. And that's Frank Rizzo, so it's not just Frank Rizzo the racist, but it's Frank Rizzo the fascist. And the interesting thing about that, the whole story about him involved in the spying didn't come from the Panthers who found out, or some left-wing radical white group. The former mayor and then school board president, Richardson Dilworth, who had friction with Frank Rizzo, he leaked this to the media. He told them about Frank Rizzo's civil defense or civil disobedience squad. And there was some friction in connection with that. Richardson Dilworth was a hardcore Democrat. And at the time, Frank Rizzo was a Democrat. And this is the interesting part about the whole Democratic thing. But before I get to that, let me say this. So all this stuff I'm telling you about, the reporters pretty much at the time knew about it, but they didn't talk about it too much. Why? Because for whatever reason, when Frank Rizzo was a cop, they supported everything he did. I mean, they maintained the status quo. So the interesting thing, when he became mayor, what did he do for the reporters who supported him as commissioner? He hired them. He hired about 23 or 24 Philadelphia Daily News and Philadelphia Bulletin and Philadelphia Inquirer reporters. I mean, that's crazy, the fact that a politician could get reporters supposed to be objective, take them from their job as reporters, and now hire them. And that's exactly what he did. And that's important, and I'm going to tell you about why in a second. That began to turn the tide in regard to the media support for Frank Rizzo, because all the reporters who loved him and kissed his ass were now hired by him. So now there was a new crop of young reporters, and the new crop of young reporters began to ask questions that the veterans didn't ask for. That posed a problem for Frank Rizzo, this new crop of reporters, and as a Democrat, during his first term, he endorsed Richard Nixon. Now, you know Richard Nixon is a Republican, so how is a Democrat in Philly going to be supporting a Republican? On the one hand, it was a smart political move because cities were fighting for federal funds. And now that Rizzo thought that Nixon was going to win and he would endorse him despite being a Democrat, Philadelphia would get all these funds, and most of it would be for police stuff. And that's exactly what happened. The problem, though, is that when Frank Rizzo could be a fascist, Frank Rizzo could be a thug, and Frank Rizzo could be a racist. But it wasn't until he became a traitor to the Democratic Party that the shit hit the fan. And something happened that led up to that notorious polygraph situation. I'll get to that in just a minute. So we went from 1970, Black Panther Party. We then went to the spying thing, which was around 1971, 1972. Jump up 5 to 6 years to 1978. August 8, 1978. I'm sure everybody knows what happened on that day, where even now we're still fighting for the Move 9, actually the Move 8+1. Police officer, I'm not going to get into the specifics here because Ramona is here and she can talk about the facts. This is what I can tell you. Two things I want to mention about August 8, 1978, 34 years ago to this. It's physically impossible for a Move to have shot and killed anybody, especially to shoot from the basement above ground, facing Ram, who was hit in the back. Think about that. The wounds sustained by James Ram came from the top down and came in the back. If it came from the top down and moved us downstairs, how could that have possibly happened? In fact, Ramona's going to talk, I'm sure, later about even what the judge said when the question was posed. How could Move have shot and killed anybody? And Ramona told the story last week on my radio show, and she's going to be back this Sunday. But that story is interesting because it shows you how corrupt and evil and wicked this criminal justice system is. It's 1978. Let me quickly move forward because I think I got about 19 minutes of my 20 minutes already in. Something happened in 1979, which for me is telling. In 1979, the U.S. Justice Department filed a lawsuit against the Philadelphia Police Department. Oh, by the way, before I forget, if anybody here is into Facebook, Facebook me as a friend, not because I need friends, I do like that, but I want you to Facebook me because instead of me having a photograph of myself on Facebook, I have the brutal, horrific, torturous beating of Delbert Africa. That's my photo on Facebook, and I want people to see it. You see a black man standing up, no shirt on, arms out, fingers exposed, and you see something that looked like it was staged because it was so graphic. He's got his hands out, fingers stretched out, and you see one police officer with his helmet rearing back like he's about to throw a fastball, and another police officer with the butt of the rifle about to bash him in his head. If you think that's bad, you actually have to see the video. The video is sickening in its degree of violence. I only watched it once because I couldn't watch anymore. One cop kicked Delbert Africa in his head and face so hard, I literally thought his head was going to fly off the shoulders. I don't know how it didn't. In fact, I don't know why Delbert Africa is not dead from that beating. If you think that Rodney King, he's telling me 5 minutes, but I see 15. No, I'll be done in 3 actually. If you think the Rodney King beating, if I was forced to make a choice, would I take 2 Rodney King beatings or a half Delbert Africa? I'd take 10 Rodney King beatings. Is that bad? So you can Google it, just Google Delbert Africa beating. By the way, the case went to trial. Everything I'm telling you is on video. It went to trial before the jury could even decide guilty or not guilty. The judge took the case from the jury. And the judge said, this case is so weak against the cops, I'm throwing it out before the jury even gets a chance to decide. Interesting thing, and again, maybe Ramona can get into it. It's amazing how karma works. Because the cops involved in the beating either committed suicide, killed by their spouses, or became alcoholics, but karma is a bitch, good bitch in this case. Anyway, let me just say this because I got like 3 minutes left and I want to definitely get to Barbara. 1979, the U.S. Justice Department filed a lawsuit against the Philadelphia Police Department, specifically naming Frank Rizzo and 19 other city officials for, quote, widespread and severe police brutality, unquote. Not only is that important because of the strong language, but this, in 1979, was the first federal lawsuit against a police department in the history of the United States. You would think that would have happened in Alabama, in Georgia, in Texas. No, it happened right here in Philadelphia. And there's some articles about it by the Inquirer did a very good story about police brutality. I wanted to talk quickly about May 13, 1985, the so-called moon bombing, but again, moon didn't bomb anybody. More information about the police bombing, tune in to my radio show this Sunday at noon. This Sunday, WRD 900 AM, we're going to hear from Ramona Africa, we're going to hear from Pam Africa, and attorney Leon Williams, who filed a historic private criminal complaint to charge Wilson Good and everybody else with murder. In the last 2 minutes, let me just, this is really important. I got several things. Let me just wrap it up with the statue. Many people don't know the history of how Frank Rizzo got that statue, Dilworth Plaza, right there at, actually crossing Dilworth Plaza in front of the Municipal Services Building. It was constructed in 1998. It's 10 feet high, made out of bronze, and the way it came about is this. Some family members and friends of Frank Rizzo were approached by Frank Rizzo's former secretary, and a former police officer said, hey, we love Frank, we got to do something to support him. They then reached out to Frank Rizzo Jr., and they raised a whole bunch of money. They took all this money to the Philadelphia Art Commission, and they said to the Art Commission, we got this money, we got this great sculptor, and we want to do this thing for Frank Rizzo. They wanted to put it in City Hall courtyard, but the city said, no, you can't do that, because if one mayor gets it done, every mayor is going to want it done. So they stopped it there. They then had a plan to do it at Broad in Oregon, in South Philly. But the family thought that that wasn't a central location where enough people would see it, so they rejected it. So they took all this money to the Art Commission. They had a friend who was the chairperson, a woman by the name of Coard Jacobson. And when they spoke to Thor Jacobson, the chairperson of the Art Commission, they had with them, at the time, Governor Casey, Mayor Rendell, Attorney General Ernie Freed, DA Lynn Abraham, and a whole bunch of money. And that's the history of it. And a lot of people said to me, can't we do something to take it down? That might be impossible. What we should do as black people is get a whole bunch of money, talk to black elected officials, and put Cecil B. Moore right next to him. Instead of taking Rizzo down, put Cecil, because Cecil B. Moore was an elected official. He was on city council. He was an influential figure. So if we can get the money, and we can certainly find the sculptor, and we can pressure our elected officials, let's make it happen. I got 2 hours more left, but, you know, so,
those other notes.
And particularly, by the way, Tony was saying something in my presentation about it was on Columbia Avenue. I originally heard the so-called strip search against the Black Panther Party. I first heard it was on Columbia, and then I heard it was definitely on Wallace. But you're saying what I heard first, Columbia is true, and Wallace is not. Okay. Because what I heard it was North Philly on Columbia Avenue, in Germantown, the first 2 stops by the police, and then finally on Wallace where the strip search took place. And this is just what I'm reading, but you know, anybody who was there, I defer to them.
There was
That's the point. Tell us who you are. Yes.
Philadelphia 14. The Panthers definitely invaded the offices across the city. Stripped fellas in the street, and that was a forced scripture that was guns to the head.
So they weren't wounding anybody.
And they fired machine gun fire over our heads. And when we came out, and they made a rough strip. And you talked about the civil disobedience squad.
Mm-hmm.
On the head of that squad was a guy named George Renzel.
The guy to give you awards in his name today?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
Right. And if you look at that picture, there's a picture that Pablo Washington had in his book. It's called, the name of the book was Every Sheep That I Had. And you'll see a picture, and you'll see Renzel with the gun to my head. And he's telling me to strip. And I said I did. But I had to drop my pants. I didn't, go all the way naked. He wanted me to get naked. I said, man, come on. You can see that I ain't got no gun. I ain't, you bust me in the mouth with that gun. It's funny how things go. black police officer stepped forward with a shotgun and told him to back off. That's for me. And the rest of them. And he put the gun, he said, man, just stand on it like that. And that's the only reason that joker didn't shoot me or beat me down if they do that. But they raided all those offices across that city. They went to Germantown, they only found one brother in there, and he was in there sleeping. They broke his arm. Okay. They went to South Philly, we had an office on Webster Street, there was nobody there. They kicked it in anyway and went in there and ransacked it. Then they went to North Philly, then they came to West Philly. I think West Philly was the last place they hit. And that's where they did it. But wherever they went, they made those brothers strip with guns, and they were shooting over their head, telling them, if you stumble, we'll kill you. Okay, if you stumble, they had them walking like this. If you stumble, we'll kill you. Yeah. And the thing about Rizzo, at the time, while he was doing this, he was being considered to being looked at as take Hoover's place. That's why he was going off the hook. They was considering him to take over from Hoover. So he wanted to show that he was, he was all, he's a showboat type of guy anyway, but that's one of the reasons why. And they I don't know, I think they were too crazy for Hoover's spot. So they really developed the man.
Thank you, Micheal. And I think that's a great segue to a question I have for Barbara. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit, though. I'd like for you to speak about what was the state of the Black Panther Party in 1977 when the police officer, the Philadelphia Police Department, put the MOVE compound under siege and shot at them and flooded them out. What was the state of the Black Panther Party? What was Frank Rizzo's role in why the state of the Black Panther Party was what it was, and whatever remaining factions of it, what was the reaction to that?
First, I want to say that I brought Brown here with me tonight because he's a Philadelphian. I'm more international. I moved all around the world with Coard. Also, Reggie Schell, before he passed, was going to give me some information to share with you tonight. But of course, I brought Brown. Now, I did not come here tonight to talk about Frank Rizzo. And I'm so glad you did that chronological thing. It's great, it's informative, and it's right on the money. I came to talk about police brutality. This is the thing that I know about. And when Ramona called me, I said, police brutality? When did that start? It started with slavery. It started with slavery. I mean, all you have to do is read Willie Lynch's Letter and some other books about slavery. But it will bring you to some understanding of how we got here, what's going on. Now, I only made a few notes because when I thought about police brutality, I had to think back to when did I first become aware of police brutality. It was when my mother cut on the TV and I saw dogs and water hoses and billy clubs beating the hell out of black people. Now, I grew up at 8th and Lombard, which was maybe 5 blocks from where Rizzo was a policeman. Now, I knew about him, but I was a child, so it wasn't like I had a lot of contact with him. But we were aware of the red car is coming. It used to be the thing. The red car is coming. So everybody would run, especially the men. You see what I'm saying? Women didn't have that same conflict at that time with policemen. I'm sure there were some, but brothers especially. So when I think about police brutality, and I think back to the Black Panther Party in 1966, point number 7 on our platform and program, we want an immediate end to police brutality and murder of black people. I was living in California at that time, and the first riot that I remember was in Los Angeles. I had just left Philadelphia in '64, and they called me to say it was a riot in Philadelphia. So I get back to California, and there's some colored people acting up in Los Angeles. But it didn't involve me. You see, you have to get to a point where this involves you. Now, when I joined the party, 67, I had to read. You had to start reading. You had to go to little education classes. You had to sell a paper. You had to be conscious of things. And my husband at that time, the police knew him by name. Whether it was in Oakland, San Francisco, or New York. They just love to walk up to you and say, "How you doing? Tell me, what you up to today? Was you over your girls last night?" I mean, the things that they would say to us. And see, that's when it became personal. When it became personal, and you know me by name, they did, I was in Germany in, what year was that? 72, around there, working with the GIs against the war. And I had a young son, and it was the first snow. So I took my son out. I wanted him to see snow. And I'm in Germany, so I don't pay Germans any mind. I'm playing with the baby. And all of a sudden, a shadow comes across me. And I look up, and the man says, "That's a beautiful son you have there, Barbara." I never knew fear to that moment because it was too personal. I sent my son back with the first GI coming to Philly for 30 days, which turned into a year. But let us talk a little bit about police brutality. Because Emmett Till, my mother showed me that picture of Emmett Till. I had no idea that people hated us so much. And she was like, "See what they did to this baby." So she educated me with this whole thing of civil rights and who was doing what to the best of her ability. So you start, and then the March on Washington. Well, that was interesting, and we won't talk about the fact that nobody got a head whipping that day. It was on TV, on the radio. So I knew there was some difference between certain black leaders and people like Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam. Certain differences start popping out before you. So I want to know who's experiencing police brutality. Now, once the Panthers got started, Huey and Bobby, let's watch the cops. Let's patrol the police. Let's tell people their rights about guns, the ability to do this, that, and the other. Well, you see where that led, with Huey being shot, the trials, and all that. But police brutality, for me, was not unique to Philadelphia. It was nationwide. I mean, if you go, well, you can go on these machines now and find out a zillion cases. But from 1966 till now, there are 25 million cases, people suing the police. So that's, yes. No, I mean, I got it off the internet. Yeah, I got it off the internet. I ain't brilliant. I mean, you just look for stuff, you know. But the one thing I would say, not only do they become personal with you, surveillance, wiretaps, all of those things that you see on TV. Now it's much more sophisticated today because you give them information. I'm on Facebook, child. You know what I did? I'm gone. Get the hell out of here. You know? But as agreed with the brother, they already know who we are. Now, unfortunately, maybe we were a little naive, and I think so in retrospect, because in looking at Micheal's book and an interview with Reggie Schell, okay, surveillance, COINTEL, local police, also infiltrators. You know, so they get up in court and you could swore because you slept with them and you was loving up on them, they was one of us, but they wasn't. They was not. So once you make yourself known, as we did, and we challenge the system, they coming for you. And they won't be as nice, quote unquote, as they was to the brothers standing out naked. That day is gone. That day is gone. You ain't gonna stand out naked no more. They're gonna kill you. So with that in mind, it's like the one thing that might save all of us is the love of the people. Your neighbors, your family, your friends. Oh, you crazy boy. You be talking to this dude. I don't want to hear anything. I got to go to church. Go to church with them once in a while. Go to the masjid. Even go to the hall. Go to the synagogue. You ain't got to become one. But if it's your family, you're going to need them because you're going to say Mom before you say God. Okay? And I learned that lesson in the party. Call my mother. I don't know. One more thing to say. Okay, you got local, state, federal, and now international police abuse. Guantanamo Bay is no joke. So the police are here to protect the wealth, and then it goes to the National Guard and the Army, and no, they're not here to protect you or me. So, but the one thing that keeps me going, we're not alone. You know, it's always good when you go to a foreign country and somebody runs up to you and says, what's that? You got a panther on your chest, or a panther around your neck, or a tattoo. You know them? So the Panthers did a lot of good work, and other people are continuing that. When they honored Ramona a couple last month or so. Oh yeah, thank you. Well, but you know, it's the same difference is that she kept saying, well, I got my example, I remember y'all, blah, 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 blah. So we are, and police brutality has taken on a different look, and I want you to be aware as you go through. As the brother said, they got the courts. You got a legal battle that might last a year, 2 years to the Supreme Court. Policy making. How many of you have read the poster, you need ID to vote? Policy making. Not because, well yeah, because he's an African American, but also maybe because you ain't doing what we want you to do. And so we get it at the street level, the court level, policies. So I encourage people that we should all be here tomorrow. We got to be there. If you can only stay 5 minutes, come. Because Mumir, and this young man on the front row. And political prisoners all around the world. So police brutality is a real issue. If you're walking down the street and they stop, you get that little black book and read what to say to policemen. I'm not a hoodie person. I was a hoodie for 1 month with the brother in Florida. That was enough hoodie for me, okay? Because you already fit the description. Your sons fit the description. And so I don't know how much more we got to give them. We got to start thinking, Dr. Montero. We got to start thinking and getting ready. Now, you had asked a question about 1977. Brownie, would you like to answer that?
So what was the state of the Panthers? It's about 77.
1977.
What was the state by then?
Do you mean locally or local?
Let me say this. You know what?
Yeah, go ahead.
Tell us why.
Let me say this. They fought the party like a third world country. Okay. They dealt with us like a third world country. In other words, what they hit us with was called preemptive strike. Go in. And that was regime change, societal regime change. Okay. What happened with the brothers and sisters that moved, that's the continuation of the Ma'afa. Because that's a modern day Holocaust. Burnt them people. Beat that man for everybody to see, like the brother said, worse than Rodney King. Worse than Rodney King. Like 10 times. So, and this continues. This continues. And the reason why it continues is because we continue to tolerate it. Okay? Because we're playing around. We're still playing around in this country with civil rights. When the issue is really human rights. And the fact that this country won't deal with the International Criminal Court. And they have already said, brothers and sisters was talking about, they wanted to charge individuals that were involved in that situation that moved on move. Well, the UN in 1993-94 had already declared that you can bring individuals to them, and they will deal with it. But we haven't dealt with it, because we haven't even got self-determination. Political self-determination. In other words, we can't even decide where we want to go in the future. Okay? They're talking about, we're spending $900 billion to $1 billion purchasing power. We need to liberate that. We need to liberate that so that we can turn it in and rebuild ourselves. Okay? So that's one of the reasons why they don't want you, because of the situation of surplus capital, and that's what we are right now. See, before we were just surplus labor. But after emancipation and we wasn't slaves anymore, we became criminals. Because that's what the Black Code was all about. They gave us mass criminality. Okay. So right now, our only purpose for them is what we consume. See? We don't ever want you to become producers. We want you to always remain consumers. See? Because your capital, that 900 billion or that 1 trillion, that's our surplus capital. That's what we use to refuel this monster machine. Okay. So the state of it is implosion. Political prisoners. What's going on with moves, from Mamir, always the same. It's the same thing. The continuation of the Ma'afa. The question is human rights.
Thank you, brother. And I want to get back to what we were talking about with the indictment of the Philadelphia Police Department as aiding police brutality and was the first and, to my knowledge, Michael, you can correct me, the only in history to ever have faced that sort of penalty. Michael, I'd like for you to speak about why is that so? We know that police brutality is not exclusive to Philadelphia. It's not exclusive to the MOVE organization. It wasn't exclusive to the Black Panther Party or the Black Liberation or even other revolutionary groups. Why was this the first time? Why is this the only time that such a thing has happened?
Well, it probably goes back to the history of black folks in Philadelphia. I'm a part of a group called ATTAC, A-T-A-C, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, and we fought long and hard for about 10 years, beginning in 2002, actually about 8 years, 2002, to get a memorial to the enslaved Africans here in Philadelphia. Why am I bringing that up in regards to the question? George Washington lived in the White House here in Philadelphia beginning in 1790. In 1790, Philadelphia had the largest free black population in America. There were more free black folks in Philadelphia than any other city in the country. So I'm assuming that those free black folks probably had a lot of pride and a lot of dignity, like Octavius Cato later on, who was beaten to death and assassinated in South Philly for supporting voting rights. My point is, you had all these quote-unquote uppity Negroes, and these uppity Negroes were doing what free and proud independent people should be doing. And I'm sure, based on those kind of black folks and Philadelphia's law enforcement, there was a clash because we weren't staying in our place. So if I had to say why Philadelphia and why not some city in Georgia or Alabama or Tennessee or Arkansas, I would venture to say because of the kind of black people that lived in Philadelphia from the very beginning. And even though there was police brutality all across the country, there's always going to be somebody who's worse than everybody else. And you look at a Frank Rizzo, and that is the guy. If Frank Rizzo had been the police commissioner in New York, then they might have gotten it. Because as the Fed said, this is a quote, we're filing suit because of widespread, severe police brutality. Not just widespread, not just severe, but widespread and severe. So the reason why it was Philly, two reasons. One, Frank Rizzo, and two, the kind of black folks that live there.
So I'll follow it up, even though you've already answered this. But why not? What was happening in Philly that was different than what was happening in maybe Chicago at the same exact time, or Boston, or Baltimore, New York? What besides Rizzo, what made it that much worse?
Nothing. I think Frank Rizzo was the key. In fact, Frank Rizzo, I pointed out, was not just a racist, but a fascist. He actually said in connection with the white hippies coming to Philly to demonstrate that if they come here to Philly, quote, he'll make Attila the Hun look like a faggot, unquote. That's what I read, quote. So this was a thug who was a racist and a thug who was a fascist. So, without trying to be, funny, the answer is, I believe, Frank Rizzo. I truly believe if he had been the police commissioner in any major city, he would have done, and not only that, think about it, he didn't appoint himself as police commissioner. Somebody appointed him, so not only was he doing this evil thing, but the powers that be condoned and supported that.
Yeah, I just want to follow up to what Mike was saying, because it was Frank Rizzo, but the catalyst was the attack on my MOVE family in 1978, August 8th of 1978. That was the catalyst that pushed the U.S. Justice Department to indict the Philadelphia Police Department, because the beating of my brother Delbert, which Rizzo and officials just lied. I mean, just straight up lied.
Despite
and said
the
it didn't
videotape.
happen. They didn't admit it until the video came out. That and the way they attacked my family. I mean, it wasn't just like in '85. It wasn't just local cops. It was the state and the federal government involved in it. And that kind of attack, orchestrated by a Frank Rizzo, is what really pushed the U.S. Justice Department to indict the Philadelphia. They couldn't get around what they saw on August 8th.
I just want to make a point. See, I didn't understand your question earlier, you know.
Sure.
That was cultural genocide. The reason why they moved on them, the reason why they moved family like that, because of that word, family. I'm serious. Think about it. Family. And that's what they were demonstrating. They showed the independence of a family that was scorned. They started developing their own little independent economics. They started developing their own way of living. Okay, and let me tell you something. They know about it because they had them little hippie communes. They was all out there in them places. In them little places, but they were out there. They was in the city. And what they were crushing and what they are still trying to crush, and they've always trying to crush and they can't crush, is the communal instinct of African people. That's what they fear about us, is our communal instinct. Because that comes from our fundamental value system as opposed to theirs. See? And Dr. Joy DeGroot, she talks about it when she talks about axiology in terms of how fundamental value systems evolve. And African people evolved a fundamental value system of collectivity. This is in our blood. This is in our genes. This is encoded in our existence. See, we are naturally inclined to work collectively. Even though, look at us. I mean, Romans 4. All they done did to us, I mean, they supposed to extinguish everything during slavery. I mean, they took our name, they took our voice, I mean, they took everything, religion, everything, and we're still here.
Right.
That's what they, you know, so that was cultural genocide.
Yes.
Okay? But yet, still. Okay, so let's get understanding because it's catching hell because of it.
Right.
So we better grab it.
Right.
The thing is, we catch hell regardless.
That's right.
So we may as well fight.
You know what I mean? Yeah, they say you black, but when we attack, you know, because you black. What are they saying? Your very origin. I'm saying, I mean, we were here thousands of years before they even came on the scene.